So, prior to the Gilded Age in Lennox, Lennox was the seat of government. That meant that's where the law is, the court, the rulings, the lawyers coming in, making all of these decisions, and the Sedgwicks were judges, and Catherine, as I said, was going to write a book. And, Catherine could really tell a good story about slavery because slavery really touched her life. There was slavery in Massachusetts. And Massachusetts is well known as a free state. But that does not mean that all of the people that were living in Massachusetts were freed. Indeed, there was a slave that belonged to a family that lived in Richmond, Richmond being kind of over the mountain from Lennox. And that family had this slave. They were from New York, and New York was not a free state. And so they had slaves, and they gave one to their daughter, and her name was Mum Bat. And at one point, on a day, I suppose a very frustrating day for some reason, because Mum Bat had a relationship with a fella, and he disappeared during the Revolutionary War. I guess we can assume that the fella uh, was a black man, as we do know that there were black soldiers in the Revolutionary War. We know that one of them fell during the Boston Massacre. We think that one of them may have died at the Lexington Green as the militia set up there and stood their ground. And also, Mom, that her, whether he was her husband or not, she was a slave, so whether she could marry her or not, I am not certain. There was a child. And so the child stayed with the mother. And it was the child that was going to be abused by the mistress when Mom Bet put her hands out and took the blow from a coal shovel. And her wound was very infected. She refused to treat it so that it would fester and look horrible. And then all of the visitors would say, "Oh, Mom, what's happened to your arm?" And she said, "Better ask the mistress." And then one day, Mom Bet was out doing her duties in the town of Sheffield, Massachusetts, and they were reading aloud the Massachusetts Constitution, which had just been passed. Well, Mom Bet happened to hear that, in which they made a reference to all men being created equal, implying freedom and rights of freedom for all men. And Mom Bet talked to the famous lawyer Theodore Sedgwick about bringing a case for her freedom. He took the case on. He argued for her freedom in the larger court. It was out there in Springfield. It was granted to her. And so she was freed. She went to work for the Sedgwick family and became very close to Fanny. And her influence, you can tell, is in one of Fanny's writings. She wrote a book called Slavery in Massachusetts. She was a very strong abolitionist. Her friendship with Fanny Kemble was also rooted in the abolitionist feeling. Now, you see, Fanny, she didn't know about all of this ideas. She fell into the slavery sort of on her own through her marriage, but she wrote a very important work, and that was called Journal of a Residence on a Georgia Plantation. And that certainly had a very powerful influence. So here are the two first society ladies. Now, I do want to say something. The most famous, and then writers were writing about slavery. Now, everybody knows that Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. But did you know that her brother was a famous preacher? And he was a dynamic preacher with a big congregation. At one time, they called him the most influential man in America. and he was the Reverend Henry Ward Beecher. Now, amongst this early settlers was Henry Ward Beecher, who settled where Cranwell is right now. He had a little house out there, and he had run into some difficulties, but his sister, the abolitionist, the famous writer, stood by him through all of his travails. And so the famous little limerick was written by a Berkshire inhabitant who admired him. And the limerick goes, the hen's the most wonderful creature, the Henry Ward Beecher. And you're pleased with that. The hen, pleased with that, laid an egg in his hat, and thus did the Henry Ward Beecher. Okay, so it goes something like this. It goes, the Reverend Henry Lloyd Beecher thought the hen a most wonderful creature. The hen, pleased with that, laid an egg in his hat, and thus did the hen reward Beecher. Okay, so that's all good and fun. There's no doubt about Lennox's side in the Civil War. Civil War ends, and the Lennox is on the winning side in that endeavor as well. So this is all good news, but for some reason, because it was such a famous literary section, it was soon going to attract people who were very well heeled indeed, because the rich follow the artists.